And welcome back, everybody. Hands-on apologetics, and we're going to talk about ancient heresies, modern heresies, and their deleterious effects on Christianity with our good friend Chris Vitelli. As you know, Chris was a Catholic who became Protestant, eventually became an atheist for 10 years through the influence of the new atheism. Eventually he made his way back home, and now he is an intellectual force out there in social media and dealing with issues like atheism, Gnosticism, and the spiritual but not religious crowd. You should check out his channel on YouTube. It's called The Reconverted Catholic. And Chris Vitelli, welcome back to Hands-On Apologetics.
Hey, Gary. Good to see you.
Yeah. So, Gnosticism, New Age, people might be surprised to think that, there's any connection between the two, but actually there's a lot of connections between the ancient heresy of Gnosticism and New Age movement.
So to give a little kind of history of the Gnostics, right, and what really struck out to me about this particular group. First, they were one of a few different heretical type movements. Again, as we know them now as heretical type movements. Then those movements thought they had the truth. They thought they were actually pioneering something that people should follow, right? Mm-hmm. But something common to all of them is that they were all very rooted in Greek philosophy, and then merge it or marry it with, Christian belief. So one of the leaders, his name was Valentinus, and then there was another person, Basilides, of a sort of separate movement. But Valentinus, Basilides, and Marcion, these are all figures around that time who all started sort of, again, branching away from what was the Catholic Church, what was growing as a Catholic Church, and even identified as the Catholic Church in the 2nd century. Like now we see in writings, like actually in church documents, right, referring to the church as such. So these, for example, these individuals, these, you could say, thought movement leaders, started really challenging what was the understanding of the message, our core theology, our understanding of it. And started from there, like coming up with kind of more, you could say, more sort of philosophical rooted kind of ideas, but then also mixing them with, again, what we understand as our Christian core teaching. So, for example, with the Gnostics, okay, their belief, they grew out of an idea that, and a Gnostic, of course, meaning coming from gnosis or knowledge, right? Their whole movement was rooted in thinking that, okay, we have some special knowledge about Christ that the apostles, it was first delivered to the apostles, okay? And then they, okay, were privy, this particular group, to information that Jesus shared with the apostles, okay, but not with all the disciples, but with, select fewer apostles. And then they had this special knowledge, okay, in understanding Christ and his nature and purpose and so forth, that took a more sort of, it took more like intellectual depth, deep diving, really, to understand that. So this group claimed to have that kind of knowledge. So it's sort of kind of already sort of an entitled way of approaching this, like, hey, we've got the truth now, right? Although they're not unique to it. So from there, then they actually, this movement started growing in popularity because of it, because it had this attractiveness, it had this mystery to it, like, oh, wow, these people know something about Jesus that maybe nobody else knows, so let's listen. So it started gaining some traction. But then, as the movement was growing, it also, its view on Jesus was much different. It started becoming much, much more radically different from, just the Catholic Church at that time. One being that, for example, like they didn't see that Jesus was incarnate, like came down like as, fully God, or fully God and fully man, and how we understand it. But more that a spirit, it was sort of like a bait and switch routine that Jesus occupied a body that had a spirit in it already. And basically he kicked out the spirit and said, okay, I'm taking over, and then fulfilled his mission. So right there off the bat, that's obviously a kind of vast departure of how other Christians understood Jesus at that time, or even other sort of philosophical related approaches to understanding Jesus. And then also how the Gnostics and the other heretical movements at the time, this is something that really stuck out to me, and you see this in the world today, a question that was resolved actually almost 2,000 years ago, but you still see like the God of the Old Testament being different from the God of the New Testament, that there's this, good God, bad God, right? That the Old Testament God was, okay, somebody it must have had to have been somebody completely different, because it just doesn't square up with the New Testament God. So this thinking actually really perpetuated quite a bit in the 2nd century, this idea, and among 3 different movements. You could say mostly in Marcionism, it was pretty heavy, but the Gnostics also understood as well. In fact, they had a different story of creation, variation on it, where there was a there was a bad God, okay? There's a good God and a bad God. There's a bad God, and there is a mother figure, not to be confused with Blessed Mother Mary, but somebody who actually was instrumental in the bad God creating a fallen world, and for which we would have to be saved from that. So I'll actually pause there because I see we're coming up on a break.
The Gnostics, import philosophy, kind of turned Christianity into a philosophy with some really different radical ideas about Jesus. And you were just starting to get into this idea of the good creation, bad creation, I guess duality that you often find within Gnosticism.
And they use their own sort of their take on philosophy and sort of on scripture, loosely on scripture, and some on philosophy, of tying this together, how they could, show that their beliefs trace back more to the apostles. But a lot of it was just sort of, again, what they developed on, listening to leaders who were well educated. These things, the leaders of these movements, it's not just that they were sort of crazy or they just wanted to be on the fringe. These folks had actually spent a lot of time studying what, philosophy, and then of course their own Christian faith, and again trying to marry the two. Again, it was almost like just one giant thought experiment. But it also shows that these movements thought that they had, claims to truth. They said, okay, I call it again, like a my truth versus, your truth, something we see in society right now. Now that's gone to a whole extreme about even physical reality of what's true and not true.
Yeah.
But when you have, spiritual reality, you could see that they come from kind of the same sort of problem or place, right? And that's thinking that, okay, I have some information that other people do not. And so you better follow me, if you want the correct information or the truth. I had said when I first started studying Gnosticism and related movements, I thought, wow, it's like as if they took say a Deepak Chopra, okay, from today, and maybe a new atheist, and put him in a time machine and sent him back right to that time, and then back and then took these ideas to create spiritual but not religious type ideas. One is a big one right now is Christ consciousness, right? So it's, okay, Jesus, the essence of, or Jesus's message. That's, it's something that is sort of built into our consciousness. That we have this Christ-like moral guide, right? And Christ was an example, an epitome of that example of, how we're supposed to live our life, but more again, and it's just purely metaphysical, or just more dealing with ideas about energy and consciousness and so forth and what they mean. And some of these ideas are kind of fuzzy, right? Because when you try to pin them down, they don't necessarily mean. They don't have the literal meaning, and it gets kind of confusing, like even the word energy. But now you see in today's age a similar problem, and this is growing. This starts going back centuries, right? We can't just pin it on the Protestant Reformation or even the Enlightenment era or dawn of modern science. I mean, there's so much that's developed in the last several hundred years that's affected our Western thought, but a lot of spiritual but not religious ideas try to take progressive ideas within the last and growing out of Enlightenment, say postmodernism, postmodernist type ideas, mixed with Eastern kind of, or not Eastern, I'm sorry, ancient history or sort of ancient beliefs, and trying to marry the two and then come up with this sort of more abstract, even the way I'm explaining it, does it even make sense, right? It's like, it's just kind of like picking and choosing a belief, and it's sounding outwardly very intelligent, but actually kind of falling on its face when you really pick it apart.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very American kind of thing. First, it's a do-it-yourself adventure where you build your own spirituality, and you kind of pick and choose the stuff that you like, and just you forget the other stuff. So you like the idea of reincarnation, but you don't like the idea of reincarnating your downward, like it's believed in the East. So it's only upward, and that's our belief, So it's like they pick and choose beliefs to fit them together in this larger do-it-yourself adventure of enlightenment.
Right, and then making claims of that they now have, like some spiritual but not religious folks or type movements, they're making their own truth claims. So they're saying, see, I now have the deeper knowledge, and this is one of the problems with and spiritual but not religious covers so many different types of thoughts about spirituality, right? It's such a big, broad, topic, but it's all based first on this idea of like, you can divorce spirituality from religion, which is a whole other, again, topic in itself, because you really can't, and then, but once you've done that, making a claim that, hey, similar again to the Gnostics, we've been enlightened. We have this now new knowledge, and if you come to our side, you're going to get the full story.
And very important point you made there, Chris, right at the end of the last segment, about the seductiveness of Gnostic thought, that you're in the know, you're somehow above people since you have this special access to knowledge. And I also appreciate that you also tied in the new atheist with that, because there is that kind of mentality, right? I mean, wasn't it Dawkins who said that they should be called the Brights, which I just thought was kind of like a modern version of Gnostics.
Yeah, right. Right. He even helped spawn, I think it was an institute for, I don't want to, it's something like about, sort of progressive thought, right? That he, for foundation for faith and science and reason, not faith and reason. Imagine if he had a foundation like that. No, it was for science and reason. Yeah, that was it. But here we are still in modern day, having to refute the same challenges, the same problems, the same even approach, which is something really golden about, how Irenaeus refuted these heresies at the time. He was talking a lot about their approach to understanding, right, the gospel and scripture, and how to follow the whole, like, okay, if you're going to make a claim, you need to be able to support the claim and show, right, not the evidence and the continuity in that. And that was that was really a driver behind his work, is the how, not just the what and the why, how you're going about doing this. And it's a problem today that we struggle with. It's really the first few, I think there was an article about this recently, something about, and I may have mentioned it then the first time I appeared on your show here, Gary, about like the first few hundred years of Christianity, like we're sort of like a mirror of the first couple hundred years right now in modern day. Okay. One, and how Christians are kind of now very counterculture in Western society, or it's become, some of that. Okay. And then other movements springing around that draw on Christian ideas, but then redress them into other beliefs, right? Like, again, like Christ consciousness. You can just take and think that this is not even, if you just go back a few hundred years to, well, like our forefathers, like, for example, like here in the U.S., Thomas Jefferson, right? That he wrote the book, The Faith and Moral Teachings of Belief of Jesus, right? So he took out everything about Jesus being divine and miracles, so forth, and just boiled it down to like, see, Jesus was a wise, teacher. And you have spiritual but not religious movements now, and because they've been exposed to other belief systems, and if they've followed, like, say, a Deepak Chopra, or if if they're familiar with the late Joseph Campbell, If they've, studied like some psychology like Carl Jung, and they start going into like religious phenomenology, people who go like they do their research, like they don't just want to have like some spiritual belief, but they really want to understand, their belief. And on one hand, you think, okay, great, they're seekers and they want to, get the knowledge. But then on the other hand, are they getting, the correct information, and are they using the right methodology, right, to reach that conclusion? Today, and now that this war on truth and reality, point being is that it is a spiritual and a sort of physical reality battle about that, and a spiritual battle, and like a sort of resurrected battle from now 2,000 years ago, right? Of trying to take ideas from Christianity and again reform them into other beliefs.
It's amazing to me that it survives, under different guises. But the only way it survives is by, like you said, kind of de-investing the incarnation from Jesus and just merely make him one of many sages, right? Because once you start taking into account that he's a real historic person, what he did and what he claimed, then you have no choice but to become Christian in some historical sense, right? Yeah, he's no longer in the safe zone where you can make him out to be however you want him to be.
Exactly, because otherwise you're doing a disservice, right, to the fundamental gospel. If you're then perverting it in some way, all right, then you have to ask yourself, is it because that's what you want to believe? Okay. And the same could be said about Christians, though, right, too. Like in my atheist years, well, like that's what you get an argument of, like, you want to believe. But to your point, what you just said is you look at, okay, all the information in front of you. Okay, you see what is the base message there. Okay, what is being taught, right? And then if you don't agree with it, okay, you can have that conversation and work through it. People, they'll do what they're doing. They think, okay, well, I'll just create some other kind of belief from it. I'll create my own truth, or whatever works for me. And it's why I call like spiritual but not religious. It's I call it what's in it for me spirituality, right? Mm-hmm. It is, and that's what I gathered from even these early heretical movements, even if they weren't maybe saying that out loud or thinking that per se. There were elements of it, of this entitlement of I've got a truth now, and I'm in this special place. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's attractive, it's appealing. I think we just do. We're attracted to mystery, for a variety of reasons, or something, somebody who seems to be really intelligent or have special knowledge or just a really charismatic speaker, right? Why have we've had problems with these extreme like cults, beliefs, and then many. In fact, my fiance and I just recently watched a documentary about a fundamentalist type, cult, and just what all that looked like. And there again, there was a claim of like, okay, this is how we understand truth, and then can you see any of the perversions in it? And that's even a more extreme example, but just and sort of. Just everyday people seeking out some belief or trying to understand what spirituality means. You want to start with doing the belief justice. Okay, this is the core Christian gospel. Okay. Mm-hmm. If you don't agree with it, you simply don't agree with it. But some things are a binary decision. It's either this or gospel, right? That we all Christians, essentially like this is, this is the kerygma, right? And outside of that, if you just don't accept it, then ask yourself, again, what are you seeking? Are you wanting to, is it that you're just trying to find something to believe that makes you comfortable, like that makes you happy? Or are you trying to find the truth, And that's what almost makes it sort of ironic, because you can have like spiritual but not religious or minded folks who think that they have the truth, right? But really it's more about, when you strip it down, it's really more about just being right, or feeling right, or feeling like, I finally found the thing that I think is going to work best for me.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think, what makes evangelism so difficult, It's because it's for New Agers especially, it's kind of a fantasy-based worldview, and it's difficult to get them to see right and wrong. To see nature and reality as it is, right? Because it's more like the things that they want to be true. That's what's true. It's not necessarily what is true.
Yeah, which then leads into various forms of relativism.
Yeah.
Then when you have various forms of relativism, it's going to affect morals and values, and then morals and values become more relative, and then just creates kind of then the domino effect, right, of some of what we see right now.